Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Let's get right to the stories we've been covering for you today. Businesses report vaccine mandates are hurting employment. Meanwhile, airline unions are urging pilots to focus on flying when they are in the air, not on the impending vaccine mandates. Reports are coming in, and the Federal Reserve says that vaccine mandates could be a reason for labor shortages seen across the country. We'll have that report and more on the impending vaccine mandate crisis. Less than 2 weeks before the Virginia gubernatorial election, Democrats and Republicans are pouring money into the state. However, a Virginia county has been accused of violating election laws. Vaccine mandate concerns have become a distraction for pilots when they're up in the air. American and Southwest Airlines are urging their pilots to stay focused on flying, not the federal vaccine mandate. Pilot unions from both airlines are seeing an increase in distractions as the vaccination deadlines approach. A memo sent to American airline pilots warned distractions can create dangerous situations. The Southwest Airline Pilots Association has asked the courts for a temporary restraining order to stop the company from enforcing their vaccine mandate set to go into effect on November 24th. Businesses have reported vaccine mandates are hurting employment. It's also contributing to a labor shortage, according to the Federal Reserve. A Federal Reserve report says that the U.S. economy has been, quote, dampened by a low supply of workers, partially due to vaccine mandates. The report goes on to say that transportation and technology firms saw a particularly low labor supply, while retail, hospitality, and manufacturing firms cut hours or production because they didn't have enough workers. Childcare issues, vaccine mandates, and COVID-related absences appear to be the main causes. According to the Labor Department, 4.3 million workers quit their jobs in August, reaching an all-time high. The Tucson, Arizona City Council voted to fire employees who don't get the shot. Now Arizona Governor Doug Ducey is speaking out against the move. He calls it unfathomable and threatened the city's mayor with criminal charges. According to the Associated Press, the deadline for Tucson City employees to be vaccinated is December 1st. Governor Ducey cited public reports and said that they did not show Tucson's vaccine mandate would allow for religious exemptions, which he said is unconstitutional. And some medical researchers are seeking for an alternative to vaccines. The NIH granted Texas Tech $1.7 million for clinical trials. They're testing the effectiveness of some other drugs that could be used to treat the coronavirus, including that of ivermectin. Meanwhile, Tennessee Congresswoman Diana Harshbarger has just introduced legislation to recognize natural immunity. Prior to being a member of Congress, Representative Harshbarger worked in the pharmaceutical industry for over 2 decades. Here's part of what she had to say. Woman Harshbarger, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Yes, it's my pleasure.
Woman, I want to ask you about a bill that you recently introduced. It's called the Natural Immunity is Real Act. The name of the bill is pretty self-explanatory. Are there any studies that you've seen since the outbreak which show natural immunity will protect you from being infected, or if you get COVID, that it won't be as severe and that you actually do have protection after you have the virus?
Yes, there's ample scientific studies that show that natural immunity is absolutely one of the best things you could have. And some studies even show that it's more effective. But, you know, if you've had COVID and the antibody tests come back positive, for God's sakes, I mean, that should be enough for them to look at that and say, okay, maybe they don't need the vaccine. And I know there's one study, and I'd have to go back and look, that it shows that there's quite a bit, the percentage of protection is even better than 2 doses of the vaccine in some cases. So, you know, these studies are going to be randomized, you know, at different intervals. But yeah, there is ample scientific data out there that show that. Well, think about it. We have immunity against measles and smallpox, and they accept that. Why won't they do it for COVID?
Well, that's just it. So right now you have Americans across the country that are faced with deadlines on these vaccine mandates where many are going to lose their jobs, their careers that they've had for decades in some cases. Now they're talking about boosters because of the waning effectiveness of the vaccines. Why is there a difference in logic when it comes to measuring the antibodies that you get from the vaccines, which is what they're essentially doing with the boosters. They're seeing that the immunity is waning versus natural immunity.
Ding, ding. That's exactly what I'm asking. Look, why don't they do antibody testing instead of PCR testing? We know that can be inaccurate. And, you know, here they are, they're going to mandate this thing. And there's going to be a lot of lawsuits against this mandate because OSHA hasn't written the text yet, okay? So you talk about upheaval in our economy, these businesses don't know what to do. If they could do antibody testing instead of PCR testing, they'd find out that there's a whole lot more that are protected against this virus than not. And right now, there may be a supply chain issue with the PCR test. You know, I've talked to a lot of these organizations and these companies, and they're like, well, we'll do that and we'll have the once a week testing if we need to. But heck, we don't even know if we can get the test. So where does that leave them? Are they going to be fined by OSHA? What's the federal government going to do? If they think there is a labor shortage now, just give it a few more weeks. People in my district will absolutely walk off the job. They're not going to wait because you know what? It's that they're being told they have to do something. There's no other option.
Now, the people in your district, your constituents, are you hearing from these folks that they're up against these mandates?
Well, I'll tell you this, it's a travesty like these, you know, these TSA workers, people at the airport, you know, if it falls under certain, you know, federal entities, they'll lose their pension. They can't draw unemployment. They can't do the once a week testing. They're going to lose their insurance. They're going to lose anything that comes with the position they've held for years. They're going to have to make a decision, and it's tragic. It's pathetic is what it is. It should never be that way. These things, nobody should ever mandate anything. And I'm telling you, they have a choice. They can either get the shot and go against every principle that they've ever known, or they can decide, I'm not going to work for that company. And it's going to come down to the states protecting their citizens, honestly. And if they don't have legislation in place, these attorney generals are lined up. And we're talking about losing 20% more of our Border Patrol agents. Think about that. We've already got 40% pulled off to process unaccompanied minors. And now we're going to lose another 20%. Look at the Navy SEALs with all the experience. They're going to step away. And Mark Green had to put an amendment into the NDAA to say, you can't dishonorably discharge those people. And I'm like, what has America come to? That's our military. Those are warriors. And they're coming up to me as I'm going to deployment services and said, Miss Diana, I don't want to take the vaccine. I don't know if they're going to deploy me, but they're going to discharge me dishonorably. What do I do? This is a dilemma. This is anguish we don't need to suffer through. This is bad. This is so bad for our country and for those people who choose to work. You know, the companies are competing against the federal government for employees right now. They've never seen the distractions. It's going to be such disruption in supply chain. It's going to be unreal. They just don't get, I don't think they even understand what's about to happen.
Congresswoman, thank you.
Thank you.
Former U.S. President Bill Clinton has released a video statement saying he's on the road to recovery.
I was so touched by the outpouring of support I received during my stay in the hospital.
The 75-year-old former president was admitted to the UC Irvine Medical Center in Los Angeles on October 12th with an infection unrelated to COVID. He was eventually discharged and returned to his home in Chappaqua, New York, this past Sunday. Former President Donald Trump announced Wednesday the launch of a new media company with its own social media platform called Truth Social. Trump says his goal is launching the new social media platform Truth Social app to create a rival to big tech companies that silence opposing voices. The app is expected to launch next month with a nationwide rollout next year. The new venture announced its creation through a merger with Digital World Acquisition Corporation, whose shares soared on Thursday. Less than 2 weeks leading up to the Virginia gubernatorial election, both Republicans and Democrats are heavily investing into their local campaigns. According to campaign finance disclosures that were recently filed, the Democratic National Committee invested $1.1 million to the Democratic Party of Virginia, while the Republican National Committee granted up to $500,000 to the Republican Party of Virginia. This year, the race between GOP businessman Glenn Youngkin and former Democratic Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe is widely seen as a dead heat in recent polling. Meanwhile, in Virginia's Fairfax County, the Public Interest Legal Foundation has filed a lawsuit on Tuesday accusing local officials of violating election laws. The lawsuit explains that Fairfax County is approving absentee ballot applications that don't include the last 4 digits of the applicant's Social Security number, a procedure required under Virginia state law. And up next, as supply chain fears grow, we try to make some sense of it all. We speak with Mark Meckler, who tells us part of the problem is at the nation's ports. And lawmakers are looking for solutions to the supply chain and China's economic influence. We take a look at their ideas for solving these pressing issues. And the Federal Reserve banned its top officials from buying individual stocks and bonds. The Fed has also placed limits on other activities. That and more coming up. Hello and welcome back. In the wake of the supply chain crisis and China's goals to expand its economic influence, Congressman Chip Roy introduced a law this week to encourage overseas manufacturers to move to the U.S. NTD's Melina Wisecup brings us more.
The supply chain issues we're seeing sheds light on how much America imports goods from other nations. For example, we spend over $600 billion on Chinese goods, and during the holidays, this dependence grows even more.
And it comes down to this. If you want a polo shirt, like I'm wearing right now, made in China, you can get an $8 polo. Made in Los Angeles in the garment district is $20. And the U.S. manufacturing and just cannot compete with the cost of the input costs of the Chinese due to the much lower labor costs that we see in the Asian markets.
This is why Congressman Chip Roy and 11 other lawmakers want to ramp up manufacturing in the U.S. Their Beat China bill would give tax advantages to manufacturers that move their companies from overseas to America. Some supply chain experts say these supply chain issues bubbling up might actually be helpful because we might start paying more attention to where our products are coming from and work to increase manufacturing here.
In the past, nobody worried about where things came from. All of a sudden, that's been made visible. If, in fact, we create better capability of employees and companies, etc., then that might be a good thing. We might end up in a better equilibrium, as we say, than we were before, because we would care about where things are produced.
Representative Roy says the supply chain issue is about more than just empty shelves and higher costs. It's a national security issue, because whoever has the economic advantage has greater global influence. And data from 2018 does show China exporting more goods than the U.S. And it's important to note that the Chinese Communist Party does use slave labor in order to produce some of those goods. So really making it cheaper to manufacture here in America is the key to ensuring that America and other nations don't have to depend so much on a market with a record of violating human rights. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
President of Convention of States Mark Meckler joined us earlier today to discuss the supply chain crisis that has been building, and he addresses some of the underlying problems of the inflation we're seeing. Here's a look. Mark Meckler, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Absolutely. Now, Mark, I want to ask you about the supply chain crisis. Recently, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said that a big part of this crisis has to do with supply, demand, and the pandemic. I want to ask you, essentially, that he's basically saying that people are doing better nowadays, they have more money to spend. What's your take on this?
Yeah, look, I think that's very simplistic. I think those are some big words from a guy who got the job because he said he likes choo-choo trains, essentially. And I don't mean to disrespect him in that regard. He did run a very minor city here in the United States, but his understanding of the international supply chain crisis is very simplistic. For example, if you look at the Port of Los Angeles, which is actually Long Beach and Los Angeles together, those ports have been hobbled for decades by bad labor agreements, which have been supported by the federal government. The longshoremen don't work 24 hours a day. They now They're starting to do that now. The ports are not automated because of these labor agreements. So these are things that are fundamentally democratic policies that are affecting our ability to load and unload in our ports. Those ports aren't even rated in the top 300 in the world for efficiency. So we've got a mess on our hands that's decades long in the making, and he's just underestimating the complexity of the problem.
So you're saying right now, under the current situation, the crisis we see, the bottlenecks, that the longshoremen at the Port of Los Angeles are not, or Port of Long Beach, are not working 24 hours?
Well, they never have, and they've been prohibited from doing so by contract. There are 6 terminals in the Port of Long Beach, and in those terminals, so you've got a port, you think of it like an airport, right? And there are multiple terminals in an airport. When the Biden administration says that port's now working 24 hours a day, you actually have one of the terminals that's gone to 24 hours. And they're having a fundamental problem, which is trucks aren't coming to pick up 24 hours because the rest of the supply chain is not used to those ports working 24 hours a day. So in the middle of the night, there are no trucks coming to pick up. So this is not a problem that Joe Biden can solve by words or waving a magic wand. Literally going to take months or years to solve these problems.
Now let me ask you this. You come from a big energy state, Texas. What do you think the fundamental cause is of the gas prices right now being so high?
Yeah, like when you crack down on industry, when you threaten industry with regulation and you push regulation, you keep the energy industry from exporting, which is some of what the Biden administration has done. That's going to cause prices to rise in the industry. So it's really, again, fundamentally a government problem. We saw what happened to the oil industry, to the energy industry when they were freed up under the Trump administration. Prices came down, production went up. That's a natural consequence of production going up. So again, government intervention is causing these prices to rise.
Now, Mark, people love to talk about how evil the Federal Reserve is when it comes to manipulating our economy. When it comes to inflation, what do you think some of the root causes are?
Yeah, I mean, just being very simple about it, it's pumping money into the economy. Money can't just be created out of nothing. And when money has value, it's because there's something behind it. When the Fed prints money and pumps that into the economy, it's actually fake money. And what it's doing is it's taking money out of your pocket, because what that means is the federal government has this money to spend. The money didn't really come from anywhere. It didn't come from a producer. It literally came out of thin air. And so what they do is they keep the interest rates low by doing this. When interest rates are low, people borrow money, people spend more money, wages can rise, and then eventually the economy heats up. And that means everything gets more expensive for the average person. Even if their wages are going up, their wages are not keeping pace with inflation.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the Fed obviously knows what the result is when they do this, and they even talked about recently stopping with or slowing down the quantitative easing, yet they have yet to do so.
Yeah, I think it shows that it's become hyper-political. In other words, they're scared to do it. If they slow down quantitative easing, less money in the market, less money to spend, that is going to have the effect of slowing the economy. And it takes time for the economy to catch up to that. So they don't want to do it for political reasons because it's going to cause pain for the administration.
Mark Meckler, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Inflation in the United States continues to be high this month. Used cars, meats, and lodging are among the most affected. According to the Consumer Price Index released by the Labor Department, the price of used cars and trucks rose by almost 25% between September 2020 and September 2021. The price increases for beef and bacon were both around 20%, and lodging was nearly 18%. Also, the 10-year break-even inflation rate rose to 2.62% on Thursday, the highest level since September 2012. It's well above the Federal Reserve's long-run inflation target of 2%. And according to the Morning Consult Politico survey, 62% of registered U.S. voters believe that the White House is responsible for the nation's rising inflation. The Federal Reserve is imposing a broad new set of restrictions on investments its officials can own. The restriction is in response to questionable recent stock trades that forced 2 of its top officials to resign. The Fed announced Thursday that it will ban its policymakers and senior staff from investing in individual stocks and bonds. Any transactions will require advance notice from the Bureau's ethics officials, and that investments must be held for at least 1 year. Attorney General Merrick Garland faced harsh criticism during a House Judiciary Committee hearing on Thursday. The disapproval came after his controversial memo directing the FBI to get involved in cases of parents who protest against local school boards.
3 weeks ago, the National School Board Association writes President Biden asking him to involve the FBI in local school board matters. 5 days later, the Attorney General of the United States does just that, does exactly what a political organization asked to be done.
In a memo on October 4th, Garland directed the FBI and U.S. attorneys to draw up plans to target parents who threaten violence or attempt to intimidate educators. The order came right after the National School Boards Association, NSBA, asked President Biden to take action due to what they described as acts of domestic terrorism against the school boards, referring to parents protesting during school board meetings over controversial teachings, among other incidents.
Not in a million years did we dream that one day we'd see the Justice Department treat American parents as domestic terrorists.
Garland was defending his position in the hearing.
We are not investigating peaceful protest or parent involvement in school board meetings. There's no precedent for doing that, and we would never do that. We are only concerned about violence, threats of violence.
Also this week, a group of parents from Michigan and Virginia filed a lawsuit against AG Garland, alleging his recent order to investigate threats against educators misuses the power of his office. Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler urged the Department of Justice to stop weaponizing the department against parents who are solely looking out for the best interest of their children.
It's time we start listening to parents. They are the best arbiters of their child's education, and they deserve respect, not contempt.
Police officials at Arizona State University have recommended that prosecutors charge 4 activists for harassing Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema. The activists from an immigration reform advocacy group confronted the moderate Democratic senator in a campus bathroom earlier this month. They video recorded the confrontation while verbally pressuring her to back President Joe Biden's $3.5 trillion budget package. After an investigation, the Arizona University Police Department submitted misdemeanor charges of disorderly conduct and disruption of an educational institution to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. Nebraska Representative Jeff Fortenberry has pleaded not guilty to charges that he lied to federal agents investigating illegal contributions to his campaign. Nebraska Rep. Jeff Fortenberry appeared in federal court in Los Angeles via an online video chatting service. He pleaded not guilty to charges that he lied to federal agents. A Los Angeles federal judge ordered him to post $50,000 bond to avoid jail time while the case proceeds. Congressman Fortenberry has been accused of federal criminal charges of concealing information and making false statements to federal authorities investigating $30,000 in illegal contributions to his 2016 campaign. State Rep. Michael DiMassa has been arrested for defrauding the city of West Haven of $600,000 intended for COVID relief. Democratic State Rep. Michael DiMassa was arrested Wednesday on charges for what authorities say was a scheme to steal federal funds intended for COVID-19 related expenses. The representative was assigned to oversee pandemic relief in the city of West Haven. Instead, he formed an investment group and fraudulently billed the city and its COVID-19 grant department for consulting services that were not performed. And that's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.